They say Christmas is a season of warmth, family, and forgiveness. But for me, that night became a frozen nightmare I will never forget. My name is Madison Ward, and while the snow outside painted the streets of Boston, my heart was left cold, literally. The family I thought I belonged to, the people I married into with love and loyalty, decided I wasn't worthy of sitting at their table. They banished me to the freezing garage, locked away like an inconvenience while they toasted their champagne and carved their golden turkey. If you've ever trusted someone only to be betrayed in the most heartless way, hit that like button right now. Comment below if you believe karma always finds its way back. And don't forget to subscribe because this one is not just about cruelty. It's about justice that hits when no one sees it coming. As the frost bit my fingers and my breath turned to smoke in that bitter cold, I stared at the glowing house lights from the garage window. I heard their laughter echoing through the walls. They thought they had won. They thought I was powerless, dependent, nothing. But what they didn't know was that the very house they sat in, the company they bragged about, and the fortune they claimed as theirs all had my name written on them, hidden in the shadows. By the time the clock struck midnight, the tables had turned. The ones who locked me out were about to find themselves locked out of their own destiny. What would you do if your own family betrayed you? Would you forgive? Or would you take everything back piece by piece until they begged for mercy? Hit like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for the truth behind what happened next. Boston winters have a way of biting through even the thickest coats, but that Christmas felt colder than any blizzard outside. My name is Madison Ward, and before that night, my life wasn't perfect, but it looked perfect from the outside. I was 29, married to Ethan Ward, the eldest son of a respected Boston business family. We lived in an expansive three-story home in the suburbs, with polished hardwood floors, marble countertops, and an pen-plan living room that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine. I worked as a creative consultant for a mid-sized advertising firm downtown, nothing glamorous, but enough to give me a voice and a purpose. Ethan was heir to his family's real estate business, Ward & Co., a company with sprawling investments in luxury condos and commercial towers across the Northeast. On paper, we were the couple everyone envied, young, driven, and financially comfortable. But what people never saw were the whispers that started the moment I walked into their world, the glances exchanged across dinner tables, the accidental remarks about my middle-class upbringing in Milwaukee, and the silent measuring of whether I truly belonged. Before we dive any deeper, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family or been made to prove your worth where love should have been enough, hit that like button right now. Comment below if you've ever been judged not for who you are, but for where you come from, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a lesson in how masks eventually slip. Ethan's parents, Richard and Elaine Ward, were the picture of old money sophistication, tailored suits, charity galas, and whispered connections in every city hall office. His sister, Charlotte, was a polished socialite with a knack for making cruelty sound like concern. Even the house felt like it belonged to them more than to us. Their portraits lined the hallway, their wine bottles filled the cellar, and their rules dictated the smallest things: where I parked my car, how I arranged the table, and even the brand of candles I lit in the evenings. And yet, I tried. I learned their customs, hosted their parties, and attended their endless networking dinners. I thought if I was gracious enough and patient enough, they'd come to see me as family. But families built on pride have a way of keeping score, and I didn't realize the game I was playing had rules designed for me to lose. The Christmas Eve that changed everything started like any other in their world: ornaments worth more than my first car, crystal glasses lined with vintage champagne, and a grand piano in the corner playing carols on repeat. Snow fell gently outside, frosting the windows like a postcard. Inside, the warmth was almost suffocating, not from the fireplace, but from the smugness that thickened the air when they thought I wasn't watching. I spent the morning preparing their elaborate dinner, carefully wrapping gifts, and making sure the table shimmered with the silverware Elaine had loaned us for the evening. And yet, when evening came, when the guests arrived, people I had known for years, my chair was missing from the table. My place had been quietly erased. It started with subtlety, a whispered conversation in the kitchen, Ethan avoiding my eyes, and Charlotte's smirk as she walked past me carrying a platter I had prepared. Then, the blow. "The garage is warm enough," Elaine said with a voice dipped in honey but sharpened like glass. We just need the space tonight. That was the moment the frost set in, not outside, but inside my chest. You see, I wasn't poor. I wasn't powerless. In fact, months before, I had made decisions that would shape the very foundation of the Ward fortune. Decisions they had pushed me into, never thinking I was capable of more than setting a table or keeping their son happy. The garage they banished me to that night was lined with their luxury cars, dire snow-dusted Mercedes and gleaming SUVs. But as I sat there breathing in the cold, staring at the stars through a foggy window, a different kind of warmth began to spread, one made of resolve, not resentment, because Christmas isn't only about giving. Sometimes it's about taking back what was always yours. The world outside that mansion was bigger than their empire, and I had built bridges they never bothered to see. Before the year was over, their name, their fortune, and their legacy would all hang by a thread they didn't even know I held. And that, dear listener, is where our story begins, with a family who thought they held the keys to everything, and a woman they underestimated one time too many. What would you have done in my place? Stayed silent, or let the winter teach them a lesson they'd never forget? Hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe, because the storm that followed this night would change everything. The night after that humiliating Christmas Eve, Boston felt colder than it had in years. The snow kept falling, blanketing the quiet streets, while the Ward mansion glowed like a fortress of warmth I no longer belonged to. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The garage floor was unforgiving, the draft seeping through every crack, biting into my skin like the memory of their laughter. The next morning, Ethan didn't apologize. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he left a note on the kitchen counter. We'll talk after the holidays. Don't make a scene. No signature, no warmth. Just instructions, as though I were a maid who had embarrassed the household. That was the beginning of the unraveling. The days that followed were a series of calculated humiliations disguised as tradition. Elaine suggested I stay with my parents for a while to give the family some space. They wanted their son free from the inconvenience of my presence. Charlotte conveniently forgot to invite me to the annual Ward Foundation Gala, where every influential investor in Boston would gather. Even the housekeeper started avoiding my eye, sensing the power shift, as though cruelty were contagious. Ethan, once charming and attentive, became distant. He stayed later at the office, his phone buzzing with messages he never let me see. I overheard conversations, half-truths and poisonous insinuations that I was unstable, ungrateful, and a burden to the Ward name. They were rewriting my story while I was still living it. Each day was a new reminder that I was a guest in a house I legally owned half of, a house I had partially financed through my inheritance before the marriage, an inconvenient truth they preferred to forget. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you room to plan. It started subtly. I stopped trying to defend myself. I stopped explaining. I smiled when they lied, nodded when they insulted me, and quietly began collecting every piece of paper, every document that tied me to their empire, while they toasted their champagne and whispered about protecting Ethan's future. I was reviewing partnership contracts Ethan had carelessly left on his office desk. Ward & Co. was expanding aggressively. I had helped broker a merger the previous year with a green tech developer in Vermont. My signature wasn't just on the paperwork, it was on the financing. They thought of me as a decorative spouse, but in reality, influenced their boardroom that they hadn't accounted for. Meanwhile, the personal attacks escalated. Elaine cut off my access to certain household accounts under the guise of budgeting. Charlotte started spreading rumors among our social circle that I was seeing someone else. Even Ethan accused me of changing since the wedding, as though refusing to be humiliated was a flaw. One evening, after another frosty dinner where I was treated like a ghost at my own table, I overheard Ethan on the phone in the study. His voice was low and sharp. She'll sign the transfer. She has no choice. By the time she realizes, it'll be done. Transfer. My heart stopped. They weren't just trying to push me out emotionally, they were planning to cut me out financially. But they had forgotten one thing. I wasn't the naive girl they thought I was. I began documenting everything: dates, conversations, and transactions. I met discreetly with an attorney, an old friend from my Milwaukee days, over coffee in a quiet Back Bay cafe. He told me the truth. The contracts Ethan was drafting weren't just to move assets, they were to sign me out of my stake entirely, using a fabricated breach of trust clause buried in our prenuptial addendum. You have two choices, he said, his voice calm but firm. Fight now, quietly, or let them think they've won, then take it all back when they're most exposed. I chose the second. Every act of cruelty they inflicted became a thread in the net I was weaving. I started attending events they didn't want me at, quietly, elegantly, never making a scene, always smiling. I formed connections with people they dismissed as irrelevant: a junior partner in their law firm, a project manager in their Vermont branch, and a financial journalist looking into corporate mismanagement in Boston real estate. The more they pushed me aside, the more invisible I became, and the more invisible I became, the more powerful I felt. By February, their empire was stretched thin. Ward & Co. had invested heavily in a risky waterfront project, and the returns were months behind schedule. Ethan was restless, snapping at staff and traveling frequently under the pretense of business. Elaine threw another gala this time. I wasn't just invited. I was featured as the host because an investor they desperately needed had specifically asked for me, and that's when the real cracks began to show. Behind the polished smiles, the Wards were drowning. I saw the late-night emails, the desperate calls, and the mounting debts hidden under creative accounting. They thought their name was untouchable. They thought legacy could outshine reality. One icy March evening, Ethan came home later than usual, his coat dusted with snow. He poured himself a drink and said, without looking at me, "There are going to be changes, Madison. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at him, really looked at the man I once believed in, the man I had left my city for, the man whose family had banished me to a garage like a stray dog. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity, because by then, the papers were already moving. The Vermont branch, the one that had propped up their collapsing cash flow, was no longer under their direct control. It was under mine. The investor they courted that winter, I was the one who held the final approval. They had built walls around me, but I had found the door they didn't even know existed. The cruelty didn't stop. Elaine confronted me in the kitchen one morning, her voice sweet as sugar and cold as steel. "We're family, Madison. But family is earned, not given. You've had your chance." I smiled. "You're right, Elaine. Family is earned." What she didn't know was that by then, I had earned something far greater than their acceptance. I had earned the power to decide their fate. Spring came, and with it, the first public signs of their unraveling: a failed zoning permit, a leaked article about mismanaged funds, and whispers of boardroom disputes. Ethan blamed the press, Charlotte blamed me, and Elaine blamed outsiders. None of them looked in the mirror. I kept my composure. I hosted charity events, volunteered at the animal shelter downtown, and rebuilt my professional network. The same people who once treated me like a decorative accessory now looked at me with curiosity and respect. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It's patient. It waits until the house of cards is swaying, then pulls the final card. By the time summer rolled in, the Ward family's control over their own company was hanging by a thread. Ethan was distracted, juggling secret meetings and strained investors. Charlotte's perfect socialite image was cracking under the weight of the unpaid debts she had hidden behind her parents' influence. And me? I was invisible, present in every room but never truly seen. Exactly where I wanted to be, because when the moment came, and it wouldn't be a scream or a storm. It would be a whisper, a signature, a single decision that would turn their winter cruelty into a summer reckoning. Would you have fought back openly, or waited until the ground beneath them crumbled on its own? Like this story if you've ever felt underestimated. Comment your thoughts below, and subscribe because the storm isn't over yet. The bitter cold of that December evening still lingered in the air as I stepped out of my car, the faint glow of the Boston skyline glimmering in the distance. My breath formed clouds that vanished almost as quickly as the remnants of my old life had. But that night was different, not because the cold had lessened, but because the storm inside me had finally found its path. For weeks, I endured their disdain. My in-laws whispered behind silk curtains. My husband, Ethan Ward, avoided my gaze, and the family that was supposed to be mine locked me away in that freezing garage like I was nothing more than a stray shadow haunting their perfect estate. But while they feasted under crystal chandeliers, toasting to their own cruelty, I planned, and that night, their empire trembled. The long oak table was set for their annual year-end celebration, a tradition I once admired from afar when I still believed I belonged. Now, I stood at the doorway, uninvited, but perfectly poised. My lawyer was already inside, clutching the documents that had become my silent weapons. Madison, Ethan stammered, his hand still wrapped around a glass of wine. The others froze, the scent of rosemary and expensive wine hanging heavy in the air. What are you doing here? I didn't answer. Instead, I handed the thick, embossed folder to my lawyer. Inside were the deeds, the transfer orders, and the legal seals that would flip the Ward family fortune on its head. In one move, I became the majority shareholder of their precious legacy company, the empire they had used to crush my spirit. There were gasps. Forks clattered. Ethan's mother turned pale, her diamond necklace catching the candlelight like a serpent's scale. You can't do this. One of the uncles hissed. I finally spoke, my voice steady and cold as the Boston air. You locked me away because you thought I was powerless. You treated me like I didn't deserve your name. But while you were busy tearing me down, I was buying every piece of the ground beneath your feet. The room erupted arguments, accusations, and the rustle of expensive fabric as they scrambled. Ethan stood silent, his once proud stance collapsing under the weight of the truth. I warned you, I said, locking my eyes on his, that cruelty always comes with a cost. As my lawyer read the terms aloud, reality began to sink in. Their wealth, their influence, and their beloved Winter estate were now under my control. The fortress they built to keep me out had become the very cage they would now live in, and I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't demand apologies. Revenge, I realized, isn't about making them kneel, it's about reclaiming what they stole. The candles flickered as a cold draft swept through the hall. Their proud faces cracked. With fear and disbelief, I turned to leave, my heels echoing like a countdown across the marble floor. To the door, I paused. Merry Christmas, I whispered, my tone sharp with poetic justice. Consider this my gift. The door shut behind me, and with it, the last tie to the woman they thought they had broken. That night, revenge didn't roar, it lingered, quiet and unshakable, in the silence of a family left to choke on its own arrogance. Justice had finally arrived, not with fire, but with frost. The snow crunched softly under my boots as I left the Ward estate that night, the cold Boston air biting at my cheeks. But my heart felt strangely warm. Not because I had ruined them, but because I had reclaimed myself. The car door closed behind me, muting the distant sounds of their chaos. For the first time in months, I breathed without feeling the weight of their walls pressing against my lungs. I drove past the city lights, past the frozen river, past the places that once held memories of forced smiles and whispered promises. Revenge, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's quiet, calculated, and when it comes from a place of dignity, not hatred, it has the power to rebuild what cruelty tried to destroy. Ethan didn't follow me that night. Neither did his family. Perhaps pride held them back, or perhaps they finally realized that silence can be louder than screaming. The next morning, I woke up in my small Boston apartment, the same place they once mocked for being beneath their name. But that morning, it felt like a palace. The cold walls that used to feel empty now carried a strange kind of freedom. I brewed coffee, watched the snow fall, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. News traveled quickly. Some of them tried to reach out, not to apologize, but to negotiate, to twist the story in their favor. I didn't respond. My silence was my answer. In a world where they had tried to erase my worth, I had chosen to let my actions speak, louder than their cruelty. Weeks passed. I invested the company's profits into rebuilding not just my own life, but the lives of those they had stepped on along the way, employees they underpaid, families they ignored, and promises they broke. Slowly, the empire I inherited began to transform into something they never believed in, fairness, and in that transformation, I found my peace. People often ask me now, was it worth it? Did the revenge heal the wound? The truth is, revenge doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't undo the nights I spent locked away in that freezing garage. But it does give you a choice, to remain a victim or to become the author of your own ending. For the American people listening to my story, maybe this isn't just about me. Maybe it's about all of us, the silent wives, the overlooked workers, the betrayed partners, and the underestimated souls. How many times have you been told you were too small, too weak, or too unimportant to fight back? And yet, how many of you carry the quiet power to turn the tables when the time is right? The night I took back my name wasn't about greed. It wasn't about punishing them in the way they punished me. It was about showing them and myself that no one gets to define your worth but you. That even when they try to bury you in the cold, your roots can grow deep enough to break through. The frost-out-ass winter turned to spring. I realized something else. Forgiveness isn't always about letting them back in. Sometimes, forgiveness is letting yourself walk away without carrying their shadows any longer. So here's my question to you. What would you do if the people you trusted most turned your home into a prison? Would you stay silent? Would you fight back? Or would you wait and rise when they least expect it? Let my story be a reminder. Justice doesn't always come wrapped in fire and fury. Sometimes it arrives in silence, with a steady hand and a calm heart. And to everyone who stood by me through this story, if my voice reached even one person who needed the courage to reclaim their power, then this cold, bitter chapter was worth every frozen night. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, like it, share it, and comment on your thoughts below. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just make you see revenge, justice, and strength in a way you never imagined.